Hey guys, Chris here, and I'm a Ukrainian Canadian. Today is February 2nd, 2025, and let's get to the news and updates happening in Ukraine, Russia, and North America, shall we? So, first, I'll cover the story of Trump's tariffs against Canada and Mexico, and I'm going to shift a little bit the usual coverage of Ukraine first because this is a very important moment in Canada's history. Then I'll talk a little bit about Project 2025 and why Project 2025 is swaying Trump's decision making. And last but not least, we'll talk about Keith Kellogg, the special envoy to Ukraine, and essentially voicing the opinion that Ukraine should be holding elections by the end of this year, and why I think personally that is a bad idea if Ukraine doesn't get security guarantees first. So first, let's talk about these disastrous tariffs that are going to come into effect as of Tuesday. So Trump's tariffs are going to spur a trade war, without a doubt. He blames fentanyl and illegal migrants crossing the border from Canada to the US, even though the real number is negligible. He was saying that millions and millions of illegal migrants are crossing the border, that fentanyl has killed tens of millions of Americans, which is an outright lie. It is a destructive drug, but there isn't enough of these of fentanyl crossing the border to kill that amount of Americans, that's for sure. It's truly a pathetic excuse, and you can see that he's imposing 25% import tariffs on a lot of goods coming from Mexico and Canada. And if he thinks that somehow the United States is going to come out unscathed, it's wishful thinking because, again, the United States relies heavily on Canadian resources, including minerals and energy. And that's why on energy, he reduced the tariffs at 10%. Because the US heavily relies on Canadian energy, including electricity, including gas, including oil. So that will hurt to the Americans, the everyday American. And you can see that Canada didn't have a choice last night but to retaliate. So the Canadian Prime Minister, Justin Trudeau, came out and announced that Canada will put a matching 25% tariffs on $155 billion worth of US goods, including alcohol, fruits, and other goods. He said that the betrayal that many Canadians are feeling is justified. Of course, as a Canadian myself, I do feel betrayed by the Trump administration and the American people because let's face it, this is not now a minority of Americans that voted for him. It's the majority of Americans that voted for Trump. And although it's a slim majority, it still is a slim majority. And he reminded the Americans that Canadian troops fought alongside them in Afghanistan, helped respond to myriad of crises from wildfires in California to Hurricane Katrina. Let's not forget that even recently, even with these threats already looming around during the LA wildfires, a few weeks ago, Canada transferred a lot of planes to combat the wildfires around LA. So despite whatever is going on, Canada is always willing to work with the Americans no matter what, and the door is always open. So it's unfortunate, and it's really going to impact the Canadian economy without a doubt, and Mexican economy as well. But to think that somehow the United States is going to come out unscathed and the United States is going to come out, the winner here, there is no winners. There are no winners when there is a tariff war. The silver lining here, to be honest with you guys, is this has been a huge unifying moment for Canada. I personally can sense it within my social circles and just social media that Canadians are pissed. It's hard to make Canadians pissed off, but Canadians are pissed off at what Trump is doing. And the last few years, there's been a lot of friction within Canada on many, many issues, the economy, immigration. But this has been a massive unifying moment where Canadians are getting together. They're saying, we're going to boycott the United States. We're going to do everything possible to become economically independent. And again, it's a great moment for Canada to diversify its trade with other continents, whether it be Asia, Latin America, Europe. This is an opportunity for Canada to become self-reliant. And, at this stage, you can't just brush it off and say, in the first term of Trump's presidency to say, well, it was just a vibe back in 2016 till 2020. The second term clearly showcases that the United States will have these ups and downs and these shifts of policies, and Canada can no longer rely on a reliable partner like the United States, because the United States has shown itself to be an unreliable partner with these drastic measures that have no reason to be there in the first place, when Canada was willing to work with the Trump administration to talk about these issues to find a solution. And one of the reasons why I believe Trump is going ahead with this irrational policies plural, is Project 2025. I haven't talked about it in the past because, again, it was kind of in the conspiracy type of field. I wasn't certain if actually Trump would follow through with this project. Essentially, what Project 2025 is kind of a blueprint given by a think tank, a conservative think tank called the Heritage Foundation, to kind of provide a blueprint for Trump's administration as to how they're going to be governing for the next 4 years. But through a CNN analysis, it showcases that 53 executive orders and actions from Trump's first week in office, they found that more than 2/3, 36 evoked proposals outlined by this mandate for leadership, Project 2025, which is, again, a 922-page blueprint for the next Republican president. The overlap includes early steps taken by Trump to execute some of his most touted pledges, cracking down on legal immigration, dismantling diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives, and rolling back environmental restriction on oil and gas exploration. And since his November victory, we can see that Trump has filled key government posts with people who helped put Project 2025 together. Tom Homan, who's serving as the White House border czar, Trump's new CIA director, John Ratcliffe, contributed to Mandate for Leadership. Brendan Carr, named chairman of the Federal Communication Commission by Trump, wrote an entire chapter for Project 2025 on the agency he now leads. And again, to me, this really explains Trump's irrational policy behavior. He's simply following through this blueprint that was presented to him. My personal opinion, I think Trump takes very little part in forming these policies. He just signs them. He says, just bring me something that I like, and I'll just sign them. And, Trump is claiming that these policies are necessary to restore American values, limit government overreach, and reduce bureaucracy. But what I'm seeing, and critics are saying that they're warning that many of these policies, and I'm not saying everything that Project 2025 is bringing to the table is terrible. There could be some decent policies, but it's way too long for me to read 922 pages of policies. But many critics are saying that this is leading the way to an authoritarian governance, human rights violations, as we're seeing with the transfer now of migrants to other countries, back to their former countries. And now we're seeing how the images are quite difficult to see, them being in shackles, Trump calling them murderers and thieves when these are just normal everyday people that came to the United States to try to make a living. They believed the American dream, and now they're being called thieves, murderers, and criminals. Environmental destruction, of course, by reducing, environmental restrictions and economic instability with what we're seeing with the tariffs being imposed on Canada, Mexico, and eventually now he's talking about European Union as well. So this is very destructive, and to my American viewers, it's up to you now. You need to put pressure on your elected officials, and for those that disagree with this, the power is in your hands. You need to be enforcing your opinions, your voice, and reaching out to the people that represent you to voice your dissatisfaction at what is happening. Because as a Canadian, I feel like we've been betrayed by the United States as of yesterday. And I'm going to do everything possible to protect Canadian sovereignty and Canadian interests, first and foremost. And let's talk about Keith Kellogg, because this weekend there's been a lot of talk about Ukraine having elections. And he said that Kiev should hold elections after the ceasefire. And he, quote, says, most democratic nations have elections in their time of war, and I think it's important they do so. I think it is good for democracy. So among other things, Reuters sources say that Kellogg and other White House officials have discussed pushing Ukraine to agree to elections as part of an initial truce with Russia. Trump's representatives are also discussing whether to insist that a ceasefire on the battlefield should precede a longer-term agreement. Again, I need to really voice an opinion here about, Keith Kellogg saying that most democratic nations have elections in their time of war. If he's talking about the United States, in modern history, it is easy to say this when the battlefield isn't happening on your own soil. For example, FDR was elected in 1944, still during World War II, or during the Korean War. The United States, of course, had elections in the Vietnam War, Afghanistan. None of these wars were happening on US soil. But Kiev has a massive war happening on its own soil, where hundreds of thousands of soldiers, Ukrainian soldiers, don't have a choice right now but to hold the line. So the Ukrainians are all for elections. The Ukrainians want election. They want to voice their opinion. But they need to be fair, and they have to be set up under the right conditions. Ukraine, first and foremost, needs to be guaranteed safety to hold these elections at 100%, so all the Ukrainian soldiers can vote. Their voice is the most important right now. The Ukrainian soldiers have to voice their opinion. They are priority number one. They're the ones sacrificing their lives for their country. And how are you going to do that if no country right now wants to physically enforce Ukrainian security and force Russia as well to withdraw a large force? I don't believe that Russia will be convinced or forced to withdraw all of its forces out of the occupied territories. I don't think it's going to happen, but at least force Russia to show commitment that, let's say, a third or a quarter of your forces need to withdraw from occupied territories, or half of your forces need to withdraw back to Russia. And then we will have a ceasefire. Right now, nobody's talking about this. And that needs to happen first before we can have elections in Ukraine. And guess what? What would be the perfect time for Putin to launch a new offensive again after a ceasefire or some peace is forced into Ukraine? Right, during elections, when it's going to be an unstable moment for the Ukrainians, where there's going to be people voting, and this is the perfect moment when hundreds of thousands of Ukrainian soldiers will be voting. Putin will launch a new offensive. I have no doubt that this is his plan, and he's shoving these lines to the White House right now. Likely, this is what Putin is trying to, convince the United States is, look at the Ukrainians, the Ukrainian side, Zelensky is illegitimate. They need to hold elections. We're all for negotiations, but Ukraine must hold an election first, right? This is likely what the Kremlin is trying to push for. And this is the wonderful opportunity if that happens, for Russia to launch an offensive when Ukraine is at its weakest and Ukraine is just simply focused on its own political processes. So this is a very destructive narrative if we don't have clear safety guarantees provided to Ukraine. And a clear blueprint, if we're talking about blueprints, a clear blueprint how you're planning to hold, to ensure that Ukraine is guaranteed that safety so they can hold their elections. So that's the video for today, guys. I hope you enjoyed my update. Let me know in the comment section what you think about Trump's tariffs on Canada and Mexico, about, again, Trump's administration narrative of, Ukraine holding the elections for this year. I'm eager to hear your opinions. So thank you so much for your support, and I will see you in the next one. Slava Ukraini!